In the beginning, in the deepest depths of our minds, fear was born. This primal instinct, this fundamental part of our existence, has been with us since the dawn of humanity. Before we knew of fire, of wheel, of language, we knew fear. It's the heart's drumbeat quickening in the face of danger, the icy grip that holds us in the dead of night. But what is fear, really? At its core, fear is a survival mechanism, a psychological response to perceived threats. It's our body's way of saying, beware, tread carefully. It can influence our behavior, shaping our actions and decisions, often without us even realizing it. Fear is complex, multifaceted. It can be as insubstantial as a shadow, yet as tangible as the pounding of our hearts. It's not just a feeling, but a state of being. In the end, fear is a part of us, woven into our very essence. As we evolved, so did our fears. They took on new forms and dimensions, finding their way into our stories and myths. From the earliest days of oral storytelling, humans have been spinning tales of the macabre and the supernatural. These tales were not merely for entertainment, they were cautionary tales designed to instill fear and keep the community safe. Think of the ancient Greeks, who spun tales of Medusa and the Minotaur, or the Celts, with their stories of banshees and changelings. Each culture, each society had its own unique horror archetype, reflecting its own unique fears and anxieties. Over time, these oral stories gave way to written literature, and the horror genre began to evolve. In the Middle Ages, we see the emergence of stories about witches and demons, reflecting societal fears about heresy and the devil. As we move into the Gothic era, horror literature becomes more psychological, with stories like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, exploring the dark corners of the human mind. In the 20th century, horror continued to evolve, reflecting the anxieties of the age. The fear of the unknown, manifested in stories about aliens and outer space. The fear of technology, reflected in tales of rogue AIs and dystopian futures. And of course, the fear of the other, embodied in stories about monsters, vampires, and zombies. Each era, each culture has its own unique horror archetype. The Japanese have their vengeful ghosts and spirits. The Scandinavians, their trolls and giants. The Americans, their slashers and serial killers. And so it goes. As our societies change, as our technologies advance, our fears take on new forms. They find their way into our stories, our movies, our video games. They shape our nightmares and fuel our imaginations. In the end, horror is not just about scares and thrills. It's a mirror, reflecting our deepest, darkest fears. It shows us what we're capable of, what we're afraid of. It forces us to confront the monsters within ourselves. Our stories, our myths, became the mirrors of our deepest, darkest fears. From the pages of books, our fears leaped onto screens, both big and small. The emergence of horror in modern media has been a fascinating journey, one that has taken us from the depths of classic monster tales to the intricate labyrinth of psychological terrors. In the early days, horror was all about the physical. Cinematic monsters like Frankenstein's creature, Dracula, and the Mummy crept and lumbered across the silver screen, their forms embodying our primal fears of the unknown. Yet, as the medium evolved, so too did the genre. The monsters didn't just stay monstrous. They became more human, more relatable. The line between the human and the monstrous blurred, reflecting our innermost fears, not of the unknown, but of ourselves. Films like Hitchcock's Psycho and Kubrick's The Shining brought us face to face with the monsters within us. The terror was no longer external, it was internal, psychological. Television too played its part in this evolution. Series like The Twilight Zone and Black Mirror used the horror genre to explore societal fears and anxieties, taking viewers on a chilling journey through the darkest corners of the human psyche. The fear was no longer just about the monster under the bed, but also about the monsters we could become given the right, or wrong, circumstances. The horror genre in modern media has also become a mirror, reflecting our societal fears and anxieties. Whether it's the fear of technology in movies like The Ring, or the fear of pandemics in series like The Walking Dead, horror has a way of taking our collective fears and amplifying them, forcing us to confront them in the most visceral way possible. So, as we sit in the darkness, our eyes glued to the flickering screen, we're not just being entertained. We're being forced to confront our deepest fears. Fears that are often more real than we'd like to admit. Our screens became portals, inviting us into worlds that thrilled us and chilled us in equal measure. But what really happens when we feel fear, when our pulse quickens and our palms sweat? Well, it all starts in our brains. specifically a small almond-shaped part of our brain called the amygdala. This little powerhouse is responsible for processing emotions, and it really springs into action when we experience fear. When something scares us, our amygdala triggers a series of reactions in our body. It's like a domino effect. The first domino to fall is the release of adrenaline. This hormone prepares our body for what is known as the fight-or-flight response. It's an ancient survival mechanism that's been with us since our early days as humans. The adrenaline causes our heart rate to increase, pumping more blood to our muscles. Our breathing becomes faster, supplying our bodies with the extra oxygen needed to prepare for action. And yes, our palms do get sweaty. This is due to the adrenaline stimulating our sweat glands. But that's not all. Our pupils dilate to allow more light in, improving our vision in potentially low-light situations. Our senses become hyper-aware, with every sound seeming louder, every touch more intense. Now, let's bring this back to the realm of horror movies and books. Creators in this genre have become experts at triggering these physiological responses. The sudden jump scares, the eerie music, the tense build-ups, all of these are designed to activate our amygdala and set off that domino effect. Even though we are safe in our homes, our brains and bodies react as if we are in real danger. The best horror stories tap into our most primal fears, the fear of the dark, of being alone, of unknown creatures lurking just out of sight. By invoking these fears, they trigger our physiological responses, making us feel the fear in a very real, tangible way. Fear, it turns out, is not just in our minds, but also in our bodies. It's a complex interplay of brain activity, hormones, and physical reactions. And it's this combination that makes the experience of fear so intensely captivating and, in a strange way, enjoyable for many. Why then do we seek out horror? Why do we willingly dive into stories that scare us? The allure of horror is a complex, twisted tapestry woven from threads of curiosity, thrill, and catharsis. At its core, horror is a dance with the unknown, a tango with terror that allows us to confront our deepest, darkest fears in a controlled environment. It's a paradoxical pleasure, a roller coaster ride of emotions that we willingly board, knowing full well the fear that awaits. Imagine standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss. There's a certain thrill that comes with that moment, a rush of adrenaline that quickens the pulse and sharpens the senses. That's the allure of horror. It's the exhilaration we feel when we push ourselves to the brink of our comfort zones, the rush that comes with stepping into the unknown. Horror is a genre that taps into our primal instincts. It triggers our fight-or-flight response, setting off a cascade of physiological reactions that leaves us feeling on edge, alert, and alive. But it's not just about the thrill, it's also about the release that follows. After the peak of fear comes the sweet relief of safety. It's a catharsis, a purging of pent-up emotions that leaves us feeling cleansed and liberated. It's why we scream in a haunted house, only to laugh when we come out on the other side. It's why we cling to the edge of our seats during a chilling scene, only to breathe a sigh of relief when the tension breaks. In the realm of horror, we come face to face with our deepest fears, only to realize that they hold no power over us. It's a journey into the heart of darkness that ultimately leads us back to the light. It's a confrontation with mortality that reminds us of the preciousness of life. In horror, we find a strange, paradoxical comfort. We find a safe space to explore our fears, a playground for the imagination where we can confront the things that scare us most and emerge victorious. We find a genre that challenges us, thrills us, and ultimately empowers us. In horror, we find a strange, paradoxical comfort. As we move forward, so does our fear. It evolves, it adapts, it finds new ways to scare us. Imagine a future where horror is not just seen or heard, but experienced. Virtual reality and other emerging technologies are already paving the way for this new era of fear. The horror genre is set to transcend the boundaries of the screen, immersing us completely in the terror. Imagine finding yourself in the heart of a haunted mansion, the chill of the spectral wind on your skin, the echo of ghostly whispers in your ears, or being chased by a creature of nightmares, its breath hot on your neck, its claws just a hair's breadth away. This is the future of fear, a future where horror is not just a genre, but an experience. Fear, like us, is always looking ahead, always ready for the next scare.